King Richard introduced new taxes, pillaged and killed the Jews for their money, and the wealthy merchants of London forced the poor to pay the taxes the rich should have paid.
Money was the most pressing issue for Richard, and we noticed in the last episode that in only 2 years, as much as 1,100,000 marks in specie had been shipped from England to France to pay for the King's War of Reconquest. He had a survey carried out on his own manors, their size, population, the number of beasts, the land under cultivation, the money paid into the treasury in rents and other dues. He wanted to know who among the nobility during his detention in Germany had paid fees for his cheat, inheritance and marriage. He also wanted to know who actually paid towards his ransom and who only made empty promises. Doubtless the latter would be pursued. This exposed those who had failed to pay anything, and the fines were swingeing. Richard investigated the Jews and other money lenders. This would have revealed what he was owed by whom and to whom. One can almost hear his advisers telling him that anyone with money to lend was almost certainly not meeting his obligations to the king's revenue. Then as now, tax avoidance was evidently common, for ordinances promised enormous fines for those who sought to conceal anything. Fines were also laid on the Angevin Empire in France. A novel money-raising device was found in the striking of a new royal seal, by which grants, agreements, immunities, court judgments were confirmed. A charter with the previous seal appended to it was no longer valid. Any man of property, therefore, was obliged to pay for a new grant with the new seal attached. Many prelates and barons were subject to annual services to one another, and especially to the king. Hugh, Bishop of Lincoln, gave Richard 1,000 marks of silver in 1196 to be released of the annual gift by which he held his cathedral church. This ancient gift was of a richly decorated cloak lined in sable fur and presented to the monarch at Christmas. Even now, only the wives of Russian oligarchs can probably afford such an expensive fur. By this payment, Bishop Hugh obtained liberty of his own church, which may seem extraordinary in the 21st century, when churches are seldom subject to secular imposts. Another Bishop Hugh, this time of Coventry, in the same year compounded with the king to be received back into favour with the payment of 5,000 marks. In the previous year, Prince John had been received back into his brother's favour for his behaviour during Richard's incarceration. He got the earldom of Gloucester back and several honours and a cash gift of £8,000, but he did not receive back the castles he had forfeited. These would have to wait until John inherited the throne. We get a rare view of the treatment of the poor sort of folk in the towns in 1196. The London baronage and wealthy merchants made sure that the money levied on the city for the king's ransom would be paid by the poor, journeymen, servants, market stall holders and the like, which produced disorder. Their cause was taken up by a lawyer, William Fitzosborne. This was not at all appreciated by the king, the barons and rich merchants, and the city authorities seized William. Some kind of trial was held and he was sentenced to death. He was consequently tied to a horse's tail and dragged through the streets of London, probably along what is now Oxford Street, to Tyburn, where he was hanged, and where executions were held in the capital until 1783. The year, Roger of Howden tells us, was also one where there was a great famine and mortality among men. In 1198, Richard demanded 300 knights for duty in France, or a scutage, money in lieu. Since a knight's daily wage was 3 shillings, this tax may have raised more than £16,000. The king also laid the heaviest tax yet on land at 5 shillings a hide, a rate of 25%. The barons were authorised to collect the money from the tenants on their estates. No reason is given for this concession to the lords of the soil, but a fair guess, I think, would be that to have imposed this on the barons themselves would have led to a significant unrest among the most powerful people in England when the king was about to leave the country for France. The collection of the money by the landlords also enabled them to profit from the tax by collecting more than was demanded. Well, they were peasants, nobody's in the medieval scheme of things. I don't say that with any rancour or censoriousness. It appears to me to have been a fact of life that few, including the peasantry, considered particularly strange. Such attitudes among the poor might have started to change in the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, but that uprising was whipped up by clever leaders and was soon over. Everything that might bring in money was investigated. Whether widows had compounded for marrying as they wished, the fine was to be extracted on behalf of our Lord the King. Paths and rough roads belonging to the King that had been stopped up were to attract fines by those who committed this offence. Such paths might have been in the royal forests and were intended to be kept clear for chasing quarry on horseback. Whether treasure troves had been declared valued and the King's share received. Local knights in each county were to carry out these inquiries, no doubt taking a consideration for themselves, as there was no other source of payment for their time and effort. Their activities and their success rates were to be checked. As the chronicler said,
"Inquiry is to be made, if all appear, who such person is, and what is his name, for it is by these and other vexations, whether justly or unjustly, that all England has been reduced to poverty from sea to sea."
The Chief Justice of the King's Forest was to array the archbishops, bishops, earls, barons, knights, and freeholders to hear the King's commands.
In the first place, our Lord the King gives notice that if any shall commit any offence against him, relative to his venison or his forests in any way, it is his intention that the full punishment shall be inflicted on them, as in the days of Henry the grandfather of our Lord the King, that is to say, they are to lose their eyes and their virility.
They were to be blinded and castrated. For most of the 12th century, the population had been growing and encroachments into the royal forests occurred, the land cleared and put down to cultivation. These were known as assarts. Kings had been taking over land for forests ever since the reign of William the Conqueror, who created the New Forest in southwest Hampshire, and it was called new because it was new. Henry I and Henry II continued this. The troubled reign of King Stephen saw the encroachments that 50 years later were to attract the most barbarous punishments under the Lionheart. But even the baronage were irritated by the growth of the royal forests. After all, like royalty, they enjoyed the chase with bows and arrows and hounds. While the forest laws were spruced up, the religious orders refused in 1198 to pay the land tax of 5 shillings a hide. The royal government very effectively neutralized such disobedience by issuing an edict stating that if anyone in the kingdom should commit an offence against a priest or a monk, no proceedings would be taken against them. If, however, a priest should offend against a layman, the cleric was immediately to be brought to book. The churches paid the land tax. In essence, the king refused justice to one group of people and ended the tax strike. But of course, the withholding of justice is no way to run even a medieval country.
Little noticed at first, in 1198, a new pope was elected in Rome who would turn out probably to be the most powerful pope ever to occupy the papal throne. He was Innocent III. Richard was too busy to notice as he retook territories taken from him by Philip II while a prisoner of the emperor.